The shove from my own son echoed louder than my body hitting the polished marble floor. There, humiliated in front of 30 guests who stared at me as if I were a selfish, crazy woman. While David screamed that I was a terrible mother for refusing to gift my $900,000 house to Jessica. "She deserves more than you, Mom. So much more than you," were his exact words before he pushed me. But what I did after I picked myself up off that floor changed everything forever. That morning, I had woken up at 5, my heart full of excitement. It was Jessica's 32nd birthday. And for the first time in the 4 years she had been married to my David, I was going to prove that I could be the perfect mother-in-law she deserved. The sweet aroma of the 3-layer chocolate cake flooded my kitchen as I whipped the meringue frosting into the perfect peaks my grandmother had taught me. My hands, marked by 67 years of hard work, trembled slightly with emotion as I decorated every detail. The cake had to be perfect, like everything else for this party. I had spent over $500 on gourmet ingredients, exotic flowers, and elegant decorations. Money I didn't really have, but Jessica was worth every penny. The golden morning light filtered through my kitchen windows, illuminating the tiles I had cleaned until they shone like diamonds. This house, my $900,000 refuge, according to the latest appraisal, wasn't just brick and mortar. It was the sweat of 30 years working double shifts, the tears of a widow who raised her son alone, the dreams of a woman who built her castle stone by stone. Every piece of furniture had a story. The Italian leather sofa I bought when David graduated from college, the oak dining table I chose while imagining the family dinners we would have when he got married. The crystal chandeliers were my gift to myself the day I paid off the last mortgage payment. Everything had meaning. Everything had a soul. The phone interrupted my thoughts as I placed the fondant roses on the cake. "Eleanor will be there at 2 o'clock sharp." Jessica's voice sounded different, more commanding than usual. "I expect you to have everything perfect. Today is a very special day for me." "Of course, sweetie. I've prepared all your favorite dishes." "Perfect. David and I have something very important to tell you today. Something about my future and what I truly deserve in this life." The line went dead. A strange chill ran down my spine, but I chalked it up to nerves, wanting everything to be perfect. Surely they were going to give me the news I had been waiting for. A grandchild. The thought filled me with a warmth that spread from my chest to my fingertips. I rushed to the bathroom to fix myself up for the 5th time that morning. The salmon-colored dress I had chosen was flattering, even if it couldn't hide the expression lines that told the story of a life dedicated to others. I applied a little more blush, wanting to look radiant for my daughter-in-law. The entire house breathed celebration. I had lit jasmine-scented candles in every room, flowers from the garden decorated every surface, and I had even hired a woman to help serve. Everything had to be perfect for Jessica. I spent the next hour obsessively arranging every detail. The silver cutlery gleamed like mirrors on the mahogany table. The fine china was perfectly aligned, and I had folded the linen napkins into the shape of swans, just as my mother had taught me decades ago when she worked at the city's most elegant hotel. The menu I had prepared was worthy of a 5-star restaurant. Garlic shrimp, grilled salmon with mango salsa, quinoa salad with dried fruits, and, of course, the 3-layer chocolate cake I had perfected over the years. Each dish was one of Jessica's favorites, memorized from our few intimate conversations. As I checked the oven temperature for the 10th time, I remembered the words David had said to me last week. "Mom, Jessica always says how lucky she feels to have you as a mother-in-law. She says she's never met someone so generous and caring." Those words had fed my soul for days. At precisely 2 o'clock, the engine of David's BMW roared in my driveway. My heart began to race as I walked to the front door, smoothing my dress one last time. I had dreamed of this moment for weeks, imagining the surprise in Jessica's eyes when she saw everything I had prepared for her. I opened the door with my most sincere smile, but what I saw deeply unsettled me. Jessica was wearing a blood-red dress I had never seen, gold jewelry that shone like little suns, and a designer handbag that cost more than my monthly retirement check. Her eyes scanned my house as if she were an appraiser evaluating a property. "Happy birthday, my beautiful girl," I said, opening my arms to welcome her. The hug she returned was as cold as ice in January, her arms wrapped around mechanically as she whispered in my ear, with a voice I didn't recognize. "Thank you, Eleanor. I hope you're ready to hear what I have to say. Today, some things are going to change for good." David appeared behind her, carrying a bottle of expensive champagne and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. My son, my only son, the man I had raised with so much love and sacrifice, greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that felt like a farewell. "Mom, the house looks incredible," he said, his eyes also scanning every corner with a look I couldn't decipher. "Jessica and I have a lot to celebrate today." The first guests began to arrive at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was floating with happiness, watching everyone praise my home's decor. I had invited David's colleagues, some of Jessica's friends I barely knew, and my closest neighbors. I wanted it to be a memorable celebration worthy of my daughter-in-law. "Eleanor, everything is spectacular," Mrs. Peterson told me as she admired the arrangement of white orchids on the centerpiece. "You can tell you've put your heart into every detail." I smiled with pride as I served the garlic shrimp on small porcelain plates. Every positive comment fueled my hope that Jessica would finally see me as the mother-in-law she had always dreamed of having. But something strange began to happen as the afternoon wore on. Jessica acted like the perfect hostess, receiving compliments and gifts with a radiant smile. But every time someone praised me for organizing the party, she would subtly interrupt the conversation. When Mrs. Gonzalez complimented me on the grilled salmon, Jessica immediately started talking about her new job at a real estate firm. When my neighbor George praised the floral arrangements, she changed the subject to her remodeling plans. At first, I thought they were coincidences, the natural nerves of being the center of attention. But when my good friend Louise said in front of everyone, "Eleanor, you are an exceptional hostess. This house is a true palace," Jessica let out a strange little laugh and replied, "Yes, it's a shame some people cling so tightly to material things when they could be more generous with their family." The comment landed like a stone in my stomach, but I tried to ignore it. Maybe I had misinterpreted her words. Maybe I was being too sensitive. I retreated to the kitchen to bring out the cake, hoping that the singing of Happy Birthday would ease the tension I was beginning to feel in the air. As I lit the 32 candles, I heard snippets of conversation from the living room. Jessica was talking to her friends about selfish women who don't know how to share, and possessive mothers-in-law who don't understand the sacrifices young wives make. Each word was like a needle piercing my chest, but I convinced myself she wasn't talking about me. I brought the cake into the living room, my hands trembling slightly. Everyone applauded and began to sing. Jessica smiled radiantly as I held the cake in front of her, waiting for that magical moment when she would blow out the candles and make a wish. But when the song ended, instead of blowing out the candles, Jessica took my hand tightly and said loudly for everyone to hear, "Before I make my wish, I want to thank Eleanor for this beautiful party. Though I must admit, I'm surprised by all this generosity coming from someone who is usually so reserved with her things." An awkward silence filled the room. Some guests exchanged confused glances as I tried to process what I had just heard. Reserved with my things. I who had given her jewelry for her last birthday. I who always brought dishes of food to her house. I who had paid for half of their honeymoon when they had financial troubles. "I don't understand, sweetie," I managed to whisper, feeling all eyes on me. Jessica let go of my hand and smiled with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, it's nothing bad, Eleanor. It's just that some people of your generation tend to be very attached to material possessions. My mom always says that true generosity comes from giving without expecting anything in return." The comparison to her mother was like a slap in the face. Her mother, who lived in a rented apartment and had never been able to give a tenth of what I had given my family. Her mother, who had only appeared in their lives after David got a good job. Her mother, who always found a way to indirectly criticize everything I did. "Jessica is right," David intervened suddenly, appearing at my side with a glass of champagne in his hand. "Mom, sometimes you give the impression that material things are more important than people." My world tilted. My own son, The man I had raised with so much love was backing up his wife's hurtful words in front of all our guests. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks and my hands began to shake uncontrollably. I I have always given everything for you, I murmured, feeling my voice crack. Of course you have, Mom, David said with a condescending smile I had never seen on him before. But giving and sharing are different things. Sharing requires real detachment, not just loans or occasional gifts. The guests began to murmur among themselves, some clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. I felt like I was in a nightmare, as if these two people I loved more than my own life had become cruel strangers. Come on, blow out the candles, someone said from the back, trying to ease the tension. Jessica finally blew out the candles, but before I could react, she leaned into my ear and whispered so softly that only I could hear. I already know my wish, Eleanor, and you're going to help me make it come true. The conversation that followed the candles changed the course of the entire evening. As I cut the cake with trembling hands, Jessica began to tell anecdotes about young couples struggling to become independent and the importance of older generations understanding when it's time to pass the torch. Every word was like a poison dart aimed directly at my heart. It's incredible how some mothers-in-law become so possessive of their sons, commented one of her friends, a blonde woman I had never seen before. My sister-in-law had to set very clear boundaries with her mother-in-law to have peace in her marriage. Jessica nodded emphatically, looking at me meaningfully. Exactly, Anna. There are women who confuse maternal love with control. They don't understand that clinging so tightly to things, and people only create suffering. I felt as if I had been publicly slapped. There I was, the woman who had sacrificed everything for her son, being described as controlling and possessive in front of people I barely knew. My hands trembled so much I almost dropped the cake knife. I have never controlled David, I managed to whisper, feeling my voice break. Of course you have, Mom, David intervened with that new condescending smile that made my blood run cold. But there are subtle forms of control that we sometimes don't even realize we're exercising. The entire room watched me as if I were a specimen in a lab. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others frankly curious about the drama unfolding before their eyes. I felt naked, exposed, humiliated in my own home in front of people I had invited with so much affection. For example, Jessica continued as she accepted a piece of my cake with feigned gratitude. When an older person clings so tightly to a large house, knowing that there are young couples who really need stability and space to grow. The comment landed like a bomb in the middle of the room. Now I understood where this whole orchestrated conversation was heading. It wasn't about control or possessiveness. It was about my house. My beautiful $900,000 house that I had built with sweat and tears over 30 years. This house is very big for one person, the blonde friend added, looking around with feigned admiration. It must be very expensive to maintain, too. Oh, yes, Jessica sighed dramatically. David and I live in such a small apartment we can barely fit. We've been saving for our own house, but you know how real estate prices are these days. My heart began to beat so loudly I was afraid everyone could hear it. Slowly, like pieces of a macabre puzzle, I began to understand what was happening. This was not a birthday party. It was a carefully planned ambush. Mom, David approached me with an expression that was meant to be loving, but which I could now clearly see as manipulative. Jessica and I have been talking about our family's future. What future? I asked in a threat of a voice, though I already feared the answer. Well, Jessica took the floor with a smile I could now see in all its falsity. We thought it would be wonderful if we could live here with you. This house is perfect for a growing family. Live with me? I repeated, feeling as if I were in an alternate dimension. Not exactly, David interjected quickly. What Jessica means is that maybe it's time for you to consider moving into something smaller and more comfortable for your age, and we could take over the house. The world stopped around me. The guests' voices became a distant murmur, as if I were underwater. My own son was asking me to leave my home, the place where I had built all my memories, where I had raised my family, where I planned to grow old with dignity. But this is my house, I murmured, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. Of course it's your house, Mom, David said in that patronizing voice he used when he thought I didn't understand something. But think about it logically. You don't need this much space anymore. And we really do. Besides, Jessica added with a venomous smile, it would be such a beautiful way to show how much you love your son. Imagine what a wonderful gift it would be for our new stage as a family. I looked around the room and saw the faces of the guests. Some looked horrified by what they were witnessing. Others were clearly enjoying the drama. But what hurt the most was seeing that no one, absolutely no one, came to my defense. I need some air, I managed to say, feeling the walls of my own living room closing in on me. Mom, don't be dramatic, David said with irritation. We're just talking about future possibilities. But I couldn't listen anymore. The sound of my heart breaking drowned out all other voices. I ran toward the kitchen, stumbling slightly on my own feet, as I heard Jessica say to the guests, "Please excuse Eleanor. Sometimes women her age get very emotional about these things." The laughter that followed her comment was the straw that broke the camel's back. I took refuge in my kitchen with a shattered heart, my hands trembling as I clung to the marble sink I had chosen so carefully 5 years ago. The guests' laughter reached me from the living room like daggers, and among them I heard Jessica's voice explaining my emotional episode with that fake sweetness I now recognized perfectly. "Poor Eleanor," I heard her say. "Sometimes older women cling so tightly to material things that they forget what really matters. Family." I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, but each inhalation felt like broken glass in my lungs. 30 years paying a mortgage, 30 years working double shifts at the hospital, 30 years dreaming of the day I could finally rest in my own home. And now my own son wanted to snatch it from me to give to his wife. The sound of approaching footsteps made me lift my head. It was David with that look of false concern he had perfected over the past few months. "Mom, are you okay? The guests are asking about you." "How could you do this to me, David?" I asked, my voice broken. "How could you ask me to leave my home?" He sighed as if I were the one being irrational. "Mom, nobody is asking you to leave anything. We're just suggesting a natural transition. You could move into a comfortable apartment without the responsibilities of maintaining such a large house." "An apartment?" I repeated, feeling anger begin to mix with my pain. "After everything I've worked for to have this house." "Look, Mom." His voice grew harder, more like Jessica's. "Jessica and I are young. We have our whole lives ahead of us. We need space to grow as a family. You've already had your time in a big house." His words hit me like hammer blows. Already had my time. My voice rose an octave. "Does being retired mean I no longer deserve a decent home?" "Don't say that. You're twisting my words." David moved closer, and for the first time in my life, his presence didn't comfort me. "Just think about how happy you'd be knowing you gave your son the chance to be successful." At that moment, Jessica appeared in the kitchen doorway with that hyena-like smile I had learned to recognize. "Eleanor, dear, the guests are wondering where the hostess is," she said in a syrupy voice that turned my stomach. "It would be a shame for your own birthday to be ruined by such a simple conversation." "It's not my birthday," I muttered. "It's yours." "Exactly." She approached like a predator stalking its prey. "And as a birthday present, I would love for you to consider our proposal. It would be so generous of you." "Generous?" The word came out of my mouth like poison. "Giving away my house is generous?" "Well," Jessica exchanged a conspiratorial look with David. "Technically, it wouldn't be giving it away. We could work out a legal arrangement where you retain certain rights, but we would take over the responsibilities." My blood ran cold. They had thought of everything. This wasn't a spontaneous conversation. It was a carefully orchestrated plan to strip me of my assets. "You've already spoken to lawyers." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. David had the decency to look slightly ashamed. "We've only consulted on some legal options, Mom, to protect everyone's interests." "My interests?" I felt the rage begin to overcome the pain. "Which of my interests are protected if I end up homeless?" "Eleanor, don't be so dramatic." Jessica placed her hand on my shoulder, and her touch burned like acid. "No one is going to leave you homeless. We could get you a beautiful apartment downtown. Get me? With what money? With my retirement pension that barely covers my basic expenses. Well, Jessica's smile became even more sinister. Part of this house's value could be used to secure your future. It would be like an investment. There it was, the naked, cruel truth. They wanted my house, and they were willing to leave me with crumbs to get it. My own son had conspired with his wife to strip me of everything I had built. Get out of my house, I whispered. What? David seemed genuinely surprised. I said, get out of my house now. Mom, you're being irrational. David raised his voice. We have guests outside. Can't you just— I don't care about the guests, I shouted with a strength I didn't know I still had. I want you to leave my house immediately. Jessica and David exchanged another look, and in their eyes, I saw something that terrified me. Determination. They weren't going to give up so easily. All right, Mom, David said in a dangerously calm voice. If that's your final decision, I'll have to take measures. What measures? I asked, though I feared the answer. Measures to protect my family's future, he said, taking Jessica's hand. Even if that means protecting you from yourself. What followed was the greatest humiliation of my life. David took Jessica's hand, and they returned to the living room where all the guests were waiting, leaving me alone in my kitchen with a heart torn to pieces. I heard their voices gradually rise, and when I finally gathered the courage to go out, I was met with a scene I will never forget. Mom has decided to be incredibly selfish today, David was telling the guests in a voice feigning sadness but dripping with venom. We've asked her for a very simple favor, a show of love for her only daughter-in-law, and she has flatly refused. The guests looked at me as I appeared in the living room doorway, their faces a mixture of discomfort and judgment. Jessica was sitting on my Italian leather sofa, fake tears rolling down her cheeks while her friends consoled her. Poor Jessica, the blonde woman murmured. It must be so hard to have such an unsupportive mother-in-law. I've never had a problem with my mother-in-law, another guest added. But of course, she has always been very generous with us. Every comment was like a slap. These people who had eaten my food, enjoyed my hospitality, now judged me without knowing the full story. I approached slowly, feeling as if I were walking to my own execution. Eleanor, my neighbor George approached with a confused expression. Is it true that you don't want to help David and Jessica with their housing situation? Before I could answer, David stood up dramatically. Mom lives alone in this huge $900,000 house, while my wife and I are crammed into a tiny apartment. We've asked her to consider a transition that would benefit all of us, but she refuses. It's not a transition, I managed to say, my voice trembling. You're asking me to give you my house. That's not true. Jessica jumped up from the sofa with more tears, this time more convincing. We just wanted you to consider sharing this space with your family. But you prefer cold walls to the company of the people who love you. The murmur of disapproval from the guests grew louder. I felt the floor move beneath my feet. These two people had turned my generosity into selfishness, my home into a whim, my motherly love into toxic possessiveness. David, my voice was barely a whisper. This house is everything I have. It's my security, my future, my memories. And we are your family, he shouted, approaching me with eyes blazing with anger. Jessica is your daughter-in-law. She deserves to have a dignified life. She deserves more than you. The phrase echoed in the room like thunder. She deserves more than you. The words that had been dancing around the entire conversation had finally been spoken with crystal clarity. More than me, I repeated, feeling something definitively break inside me. Yes, David was out of control now. All his pretense of kindness had vanished. She's young. She has her whole life ahead of her. She can do something productive with this property. You're just wasting it. David, please. Jessica pretended to try to calm him, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. This was exactly what she had planned. No, Jessica. It's time for Mom to hear the truth, he continued shouting as he moved closer to me. You've been selfish your whole life, always thinking only of yourself. You've never considered what's best for the family. I raised you alone, I whispered, feeling the tears begin to fall. I worked 2 jobs to give you everything. I sacrificed my youth, my dreams, everything for you. And now it's time for you to pay back that sacrifice, he roared. Jessica deserves to have the life I could never give her. She deserves more than a selfish old woman clinging to material things. The guests watched in horror as my son emotionally destroyed me in front of everyone, but the worst was yet to come. Mom, his voice became dangerously calm. If you don't sign the papers to transfer this property voluntarily, I'll have to find other legal alternatives. What alternatives? I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. Jessica approached with a triumphant smile. We've consulted with lawyers who specialize in cases of elderly adults who cannot make rational decisions about their assets. The air was sucked from my lungs. Are you threatening to have me declared incompetent? Only if you force us to. David crossed his arms. But it would be much easier if you just agreed to do the right thing. The right thing? My voice rose to a scream. The right thing is to steal the house from a 67-year-old woman? You don't need this house. David completely lost his temper. Jessica needs it more. She deserves more than you. And then it happened. I approached him, my own son, with tears streaming down my cheeks, and I screamed with all the strength I had left. This is my house. I bought it with my own work. I am not giving it to anyone. David looked at me with pure contempt, raised his hand, and pushed me with such force that I fell to the marble floor in front of all the guests. The silence that followed was deafening. From the cold floor of my own living room, looking up at my son who had pushed me, I felt something fundamental break within my soul. The physical pain of the fall was nothing compared to the agony of seeing the 30 people I had invited into my home watching me as if I were a crushed insect. No one moved to help me. No one said a word in my defense. Look what you made me do, David shouted, pointing a finger at me as I tried to get up. This is your fault for being so stubborn and selfish. Jessica covered her mouth with both hands, feigning horror. But through her fingers, I could see a smile of satisfaction. This was exactly what she had orchestrated. She wanted me to look humiliated, defeated, vulnerable in front of witnesses. David, you shouldn't have, my neighbor George muttered, but his voice sounded more concerned about the scene than my well-being. She asked for it, my son roared, completely out of control. We offered her a dignified solution and she chose to act like a victim. I managed to get to my feet, my legs trembling, feeling all the eyes in the room judging me. My salmon-colored dress was wrinkled, my hair disheveled, and I could feel a bruise forming on my right hip. But what hurt the most was the look of contempt from my own son. I think you should all leave, I managed to whisper, addressing the guests who seemed paralyzed by the tension. Excellent idea, Jessica said in her syrupy voice, approaching me with that false concern I now recognized perfectly. Eleanor needs some time to reflect on her priorities. The guests began to move slowly toward the door, some murmuring among themselves, others simply escaping the discomfort. I heard snippets of conversation. Poor Jessica, what a difficult situation. Older women sometimes become very stubborn. No one said goodbye to me. No one asked if I was okay. 30 people left my house without a single word of support or comfort. It was as if I had ceased to exist as a human being and had become the selfish obstacle Jessica had painted me to be. When everyone had finally left, only the 3 of us remained in my living room. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock that had belonged to my mother. Mom, David spoke in a tired voice, as if he were the one who had suffered all afternoon. You can still make the right decision. We can fix this in a civilized way. I looked into his eyes, those eyes that had been my greatest pride when he was a child, and I saw a stranger, a man who had inherited my blood, but not my heart, a man capable of pushing his own mother for money. Out, I whispered. What? He asked, as if he hadn't heard clearly. Out of my house! I screamed with a force I didn't know I still possessed. Both of you out! Jessica approached with that venomous smile she had perfected. Eleanor, you're upset. Maybe you should rest and tomorrow we can— There is no tomorrow, I roared, feeling the rage finally overcome the pain. "I never want to see either of you again in my life." "Mom, you're being hysterical." David approached again, and for a moment, I feared he would push me again. "Tomorrow, when you've calmed down, we'll talk more calmly." "There's nothing to talk about." My voice had become icy, controlled, dangerous. "You have shown exactly who you are. Now leave." Jessica took David's hand and murmured something in his ear. He nodded and looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Contempt mixed with determination. "All right, Mom, we'll give you time to reconsider, but this isn't over. We're going to fight for what's fair, for what Jessica deserves. And if we have to use other methods to protect our interests," Jessica added in a sweet but threatening voice, "we will. There are many ways to prove that an elderly person is not fit to manage such a valuable property." The threat was crystal clear. If I didn't hand over my house voluntarily, they would seek to have me declared mentally incompetent to take it from me legally. I watched them leave my house, heard the engine of their car fade away, and I was left alone in my devastated living room. The dirty party dishes were scattered on all the tables. The balloons were starting to deflate, and the smell of the cake had become nauseating. I collapsed onto my Italian leather sofa, and for the first time in 67 years of life, I cried as if the world had ended, because in a way it had. The world where I had a son who loved me had died that afternoon. But as I cried, something else began to be born inside me, something I had never felt before. A cold, calculating, relentless rage. If they wanted a war, they would get one, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat on my sofa, surrounded by the remnants of the party I had organized with so much love, feeling my world crumble piece by piece. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's look of contempt, heard Jessica's poisonous words. I relived the humiliation of being thrown on the floor while 30 people judged me in silence. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I got up, went to my room, pulled a suitcase from the closet, and began to pack. I wasn't going to stay in this house one more night, feeling like a prisoner in my own home, waiting for them to arrive with legal papers to strip me of everything. As I folded my clothes with trembling hands, I remembered my sister Carol's words from the week before. "Eleanor, if you ever need to escape from anything, my house is always open." I called a cab at 5 in the morning and left my house just as it was, with the dirty dishes, the deflated balloons, the half-eaten cake rotting on the table. Let David and Jessica see the result of their cruelty. Let them smell the decay of what they had destroyed. Sometimes the greatest strength comes not from what we build, but from what we leave behind. The drive to Carol's house on the coast took 2 hours. The entire way, my phone didn't stop ringing. David called 17 times. Jessica, 5. The messages they left oscillated between false concern and veiled threats. "Mom, where are you? We're worried." "Eleanor, we came back to your house and you're not here. This is very irresponsible of you." "Mom, if you don't show up, we'll have to call the police." I turned off the phone when I arrived at my sister's house. Carol opened the door in her robe, her hair tousled and her face etched with worry. When she saw me standing on her doorstep with a suitcase and eyes swollen from crying, she didn't ask a single question. She just hugged me and murmured, "Come in, sister, you're safe here." Her house smelled of fresh coffee and sea salt. The windows looked out directly onto the ocean, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could fully breathe. I sat in her kitchen while she made breakfast, and slowly, my voice cracking with pain, I told her everything that had happened. Carol listened in silence, but I saw her expression harden with each detail. When I finished recounting the shove and public humiliation, she slammed her fist on the table. "That bastard," she muttered through clenched teeth. "That son of a dared to push you." "Carol, he's my son," I whispered, though the words tasted like ash. "No." She looked at me with eyes full of determination. "A son doesn't do that. What you have is a stranger who shares your blood." I spent 3 days at my sister's house, sleeping for the first time in months without nightmares, waking up to the sound of the waves instead of the terror of facing another day of manipulation. But on the morning of the fourth day, Carol came into my room with a serious expression. "Eleanor, you need to see this," she said, handing me her tablet. On the screen was a Facebook post from Jessica. The photo showed her and David embracing in front of my house with smiles that chilled me to the bone. The caption read, "With heavy hearts, we're reporting that our beloved Eleanor is going through an emotional crisis and has disappeared from her home. We are very concerned for her mental well-being and ask for your prayers. We have had to temporarily move into her house to look after the property while we await news." The comments were worse. Dozens of people expressing their concern for my deteriorating mental state and congratulating David and Jessica for being so responsible and loving by taking care of my property in my absence. "They've already moved in," I murmured, feeling my heart break all over again. "Read the comments," Carol said in a somber voice. I scrolled down and found comments from the party guests. Each one told a distorted version of what had happened. "Poor David. His mom became so aggressive. Eleanor was always so possessive. It's so sad when elderly parents become irrational about money." Jessica had orchestrated a perfect smear campaign. In less than a week, she had turned my disappearance into evidence of my mental incompetence. She had justified their occupation of my house, and she had gotten the entire community to see her as the victim of a problematic mother-in-law. "Sister," Carol sat next to me and took my hands, "I have something to tell you. I've been documenting everything you've told me about David and Jessica for the last few months." "Documenting?" I asked, confused. She pulled out a folder full of papers, recordings of our phone calls where you told me about their demands for money, photos of the bruises you had after your family disagreements, copies of the threatening messages you sent me. "Why did you do that?" "Because I knew this was going to happen." Her eyes filled with tears. "Because I've seen how they've been manipulating and abusing you for years, and I knew that eventually they would try to take everything from you." She showed me page after page of evidence she had been collecting without my knowledge. My sister, who had always seemed so carefree, had been building a legal case to protect me. "Carol," I whispered, "what are we going to do?" She smiled for the first time in days, and there was something fierce in that smile. "We're going to destroy them." On Monday morning, Carol took me to the most prestigious law firm in the city. Robert Evans, a lawyer specializing in family law and elder abuse cases, reviewed all the documentation my sister had compiled with an increasingly grim expression. "Mrs. Miller," he said after examining the recordings, photographs, and messages, "what your son and daughter-in-law have done constitutes several crimes: extortion, threats, domestic violence, and now illegal occupation of property." "But he's my son," I murmured, the words catching in my throat. "And that is precisely why it's more serious," Robert replied firmly. "Familial abuse is one of the most cowardly crimes there is." We spent 3 hours planning our strategy. Robert had investigated Jessica and discovered information that left me frozen. She had a history of petty scams and had been married twice before, always to older men who owned valuable properties. David wasn't her first victim. He was her specialty. "Your daughter-in-law is a professional con artist," Robert explained, showing me the documents, "and she has been training your son to be her accomplice." That afternoon, we returned to Carol's house to find 18 missed calls from David. The voicemails ranged from false concern to direct threats. "Mom, if you don't appear in 24 hours, we're going to report you as a missing person with mental health issues. Eleanor, your erratic behavior is forcing us to take legal action." But there was one message that shattered my soul. It was from my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson. "Eleanor, dear, I don't know what to believe. David and Jessica have been telling the whole neighborhood that you had a psychotic episode and are wandering somewhere aimlessly. They've organized volunteer searches and are talking to doctors about having you committed when you turn up. I hope you're okay." "They're going to try to have me committed," I said to Carol in horror. "Over my dead body," my sister replied, with a determination I had never seen in her. Robert had been clear. We had to act fast before David and Jessica could formalize any legal proceedings against my mental capacity. The plan was simple but effective. On Wednesday morning, when they thought they had everything under control, we would serve them with a lawsuit for illegal occupation, extortion, and domestic violence. But I wanted something more. I wanted them to pay for every humiliation, every manipulation, every tear they had wrung from me. Robert, I told him on Tuesday night, I want you to arrange a meeting. Tell them I'm willing to negotiate. Are you sure? We could lose the element of surprise. Trust me, I replied, feeling something cold and calculating settle in my chest. I want to look them in the eyes when they realize they've lost. On Wednesday at 10 o'clock in the morning, we met at Robert's office. David and Jessica arrived with their own lawyer, a young man who had clearly underestimated the situation. Jessica wore a cream-colored dress and pearls, playing the part of the concerned daughter-in-law to perfection. Mom, David stood up when I entered, feigning relief. We were so worried. Where have you been? Sit down, I replied in an icy voice, not returning his fake embrace. Eleanor, Jessica approached with fabricated tears. We've been so distressed. The house feels so empty without you. I'm sure it does, I replied, enjoying the confusion in her eyes at my coldness. Robert took control of the meeting immediately. We are here to discuss the immediate eviction from Mrs. Miller's property and the subsequent legal actions. Their lawyer, a Mr. Vega, laughed nervously. Eviction? Mr. Evans, I think there's a misunderstanding. My clients are caring for the property of a woman who is clearly going through a mental health crisis. A mental health crisis? Robert smiled like a predator. Interesting. Do you have any medical documentation to support that claim? Well, no, but Vega began to stammer. Because we do have documentation. Robert placed the first folder on the table. Audio recordings where your clients threaten, extort, and emotionally blackmail my client. David's face turned pale. Those recordings were made without our consent. In this state, only one party's consent is required, Robert replied with a smile. And your mother consented to every recording. Jessica finally understood this was not a friendly negotiation. Eleanor, what are you doing? We're family. Family? My voice was laced with venom. Does family push a 67-year-old woman to the floor? Does family threaten to steal her house? I never said steal, David protested. Robert placed the second folder on the table. Here we have your wife's criminal record, Mr. Miller. 3 prior marriages, all to older property-owning men, all ending after she obtained valuable assets. The silence in the room was deafening. David looked at Jessica with growing horror. What is he talking about? David, honey, I'll explain later, Jessica murmured. But it was too late. Your wife is a professional con artist, I continued, savoring every word. And you are her perfect puppet. A con artist? David turned to Jessica, his eyes filled with horror. What are they talking about? Robert laid photographs on the table. Jessica at her previous wedding to a 70-year-old man, property transfer documents, police reports of minor scams. Each image was a stab to my son's heart as he began to understand the magnitude of his betrayal. Her first husband, Robert Clement, left her his $500,000 house before he died, mysteriously, Robert explained in a clinical tone. Her second husband, Manuel Torres, transferred his family business to her name 3 months before she filed for divorce. The pattern is always the same: seduce, manipulate, isolate the victim from their family, and finally strip them of everything. Jessica had gone completely pale, but still tried to maintain her facade. That's not true, David. Honey, don't believe them. Is that why you pushed me away from my mom? David looked at her as if seeing a stranger. Is that why you always insisted she was selfish and possessive? Because she was? Jessica tried to stick to her story, but her voice trembled. Eleanor never accepted us as a family. I did accept you, I said, my voice cracking, feeling the tears threaten to return. I opened my home to you. I treated you like a daughter. I spent my savings on your happiness, and you repaid me by turning my own son against me. Robert continued, relentless. But here's the best part. Your daughter-in-law is not only a con artist, she's also a pathological liar. Has she told you, David, about her other 2 children? The world stopped. What other children? David murmured. Jessica has 2 children from previous marriages who live with their grandparents because she abandoned them when they were no longer useful for her scams. Robert displayed more documents. And there's something else interesting. She was never pregnant during your marriage, but she lost the baby last year. David looked like he was in shock. She was devastated for months. Psychological pregnancy or simply a lie? Robert replied. The medical records we have indicate she was never pregnant. David turned to Jessica with a look I had never seen in his eyes. Pure contempt. You lied about the baby. David, I can explain everything. Jessica began to cry. But these tears were different. Desperate, real. I love you. Everything I did was for our future. Our future? David stood up abruptly. Or your next con. In that moment, I understood something terrible. My son had been as much a victim as I was. Jessica had systematically destroyed our relationship, turning him into her weapon against me. But the difference was, he had chosen to believe her. He had chosen to push me. He had chosen to humiliate me. David, I said softly, I know she manipulated you, but you chose to push me. You chose to threaten me. You chose to humiliate me in front of 30 people. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Mom, I didn't know. You knew you were hurting me, I interrupted, and you chose to do it anyway. Robert placed the final documents on the table. Mrs. Miller, here is an immediate eviction order. You have 24 hours to vacate the property. Any attempt to return will be considered trespassing. And here, he added, handing her another paper, is a restraining order. You cannot come within 500 yards of my client. Jessica finally exploded. This is ridiculous. That house should be mine. I deserve it after everything I've put up with in this dysfunctional family. Her words were a gift. Robert smiled and pointed to a small recorder on the table. Thank you for that final confession, Mrs. Miller. Their lawyer, Mr. Vega, stood up hastily. My clients will make no further statements. This meeting is over. But I wasn't finished. I stood up slowly, looking my son in the eyes one last time. David, you were the light of my life for 42 years. I raised you alone, worked 2 jobs to give you everything. I sacrificed my youth for your happiness. And when I finally needed you to defend me, you chose to push me to the floor. Mom, please. He tried to approach, but I stopped him with a look. No more. My voice was as firm as steel. Some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. I hope she was worth it, because she cost you a mother. I walked out of that office with my head held high, leaving behind 42 years of maternal love and embracing something new, my freedom. The weeks that followed were a mixture of liberation and grief. With Robert's help, we ensured that David and Jessica vacated my house within the allotted 24 hours. A court-appointed official supervised their departure, documenting any damage to the property. They had been living there for only a week, but the mess they left behind spoke volumes about their character. Cigarette burns on my oak table, wine stains on the Italian leather sofa, and broken picture frames, all containing photos of David and me. Carol insisted I stay with her until the house was properly cleaned and secured. You don't need to face those ghosts alone, she said, holding my hand as we stood in the driveway watching the cleaning crew enter. I couldn't bring myself to step inside, not yet. The memory of being pushed to the floor was still too fresh, too painful. David tried to contact me several times after the meeting at Robert's office. His calls went unanswered, his text messages unread, his handwritten letter returned unopened. It wasn't spite that drove my refusal to engage. It was self-preservation. Some wounds are too deep to expose to the same knife that cut them. Jessica disappeared from both our lives. According to my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, who had become my unexpected ally, Jessica moved out of David's apartment the same day they were evicted from my house. She didn't even take all her things, Mrs. Peterson reported over tea at Carol's house. David has been giving her clothes and jewelry to charity. The word around town is that he's filing for divorce. I felt no satisfaction at this news. The destruction of my son's marriage brought me no joy, even if it had been built on lies. The loss was too great, the cost too high. We had all lost something irreplaceable. David, his illusions, me, my son, and Jessica, her latest con. 3 weeks after the confrontation at Robert's office, I finally found the strength to return to my house. Carol accompanied me, her hand steady on my elbow as I inserted the key into the lock. The cleaning crew had done an excellent job. No trace remained of David and Jessica's brief occupation. The furniture had been restored or replaced, the walls repainted, the floors polished to a mirror shine. But something was missing. The soul of the home, the warmth, the memories that had once filled every corner now seemed distant, contaminated by what had happened that fateful day. I walked from room to room, touching familiar objects that somehow felt foreign. The Italian leather sofa, the oak dining table, the crystal chandeliers. They were just things now, stripped of the meaning I had imbued them with over the years. "I can't stay here," I whispered to Carol as we stood in the living room, on the exact spot where I had fallen. "You don't have to decide anything right now," she reassured me. "Take your time." But in my heart, I already knew. This house, which had been my refuge for 30 years, had become a museum of pain. Every room echoed with Jessica's venomous words, every corner shadowed by David's betrayal. The security I had fought so hard to build had been irreparably breached. That night, lying in the guest bedroom at Carol's house, unable to sleep in my own, I made a decision that would alter the course of my remaining years. I would sell the house, not because David and Jessica had wanted me to, but because I needed to free myself from the prison of memories it had become. The next morning, I called Robert to inform him of my decision. "Are you sure, Mrs. Miller? This is exactly what they wanted." "No," I corrected him. "They wanted to take it from me. I'm choosing to leave it behind. There's a difference." "What will you do?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I don't know yet," I admitted. But for the first time in decades, the unknown doesn't frighten me. The process of selling a house is both bureaucratic and emotional. There are papers to sign, inspections to schedule, decisions about what to keep and what to discard. I approached each task with a detachment that surprised even me. The crystal chandeliers, sell them with the house. The Italian leather sofa, donate it to a women's shelter. The oak dining table, Carol wanted it for her beach house. Item by item, memory by memory, I untethered myself from the physical manifestations of my past. It was painful, yes, but also unexpectedly liberating. Each piece that left the house took with it a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. The real estate agent, a kind woman named Sarah, was amazed at the market value of my home. "Properties in this neighborhood have appreciated significantly, Mrs. Miller. With the renovations you've done, we can list it at $950,000, possibly more." The number made my head spin. Almost $1 million for a house I had purchased for a fraction of that 3 decades ago. The fruit of years of double shifts, budget constraints, and delayed gratification. "What will you do with the money?" Carol asked one evening as we sorted through old photographs, deciding which ones to keep. I paused, a picture of David's 5th birthday in my hands. "I'm not sure yet. Save most of it, I suppose." "Eleanor," my sister's voice took on a stern quality I rarely heard. "You've spent your entire life saving, preparing for a future that kept receding. Maybe it's time to start living in the present." The words hit me with unexpected force. She was right. I had always deferred joy, postponed dreams, delayed gratification. Always for someone else. For David, for my patients at the hospital, for the nebulous family I had tried to build. When had I last done something solely for myself? "What would you do?" I asked her, genuinely curious. Carol didn't hesitate. "Travel, see all the places we talked about as girls. Remember how we used to pore over those National Geographic magazines in Dad's study? Paris, Rome, Tokyo. The world is waiting, Eleanor. And now you have both the means and the freedom to explore it." The idea took root in my mind, growing stronger with each passing day. Why not? What was keeping me here? The house would soon belong to someone else. David had made his choice. My job at the hospital was long behind me. For the first time in my adult life, I was untethered, unobligated, free. 2 months after that fateful birthday party, my house sold for $975,000 to a young couple with 2 small children. They loved the oak floors, the spacious kitchen, the garden where I had grown tomatoes and herbs. They didn't see the ghost that haunted each room. They saw only possibility, a future waiting to be written. At the closing, the wife, a woman about Jessica's age but with kind eyes, squeezed my hand. "We'll take good care of your home, Mrs. Miller." "It's your home now," I corrected her gently. "Make it a happy one." With the proceeds from the sale, I did something I had never done before. I acted impulsively. I bought a small, elegant condo by the ocean, 2 buildings down from Carol's house. 1 bedroom, a kitchen with state-of-the-art appliances, and a balcony that faced the sunrise. It cost a fraction of what I had received for my house, leaving me with a substantial sum to invest and, yes, to spend. "What's first on your list?" Carol asked as we clinked champagne glasses on my new balcony, watching the waves crash against the shore. "Paris," I decided, "in the spring. Then Rome in early summer, Tokyo in the fall." "Alone?" I considered the question. The thought of navigating foreign cities by myself was daunting, but also exhilarating. "Yes, I've spent my whole life depending on others, or having them depend on me. I think it's time I learned to be sufficient unto myself." The months passed in a flurry of preparations: passport renewal, travel guides, language apps on my phone. I attacked each task with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a trip, it was a rebirth. But life has a way of interrupting even the most carefully laid plans. 3 weeks before my scheduled departure for Paris, as I was shopping for a new suitcase, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Miller? This is Nurse Jenkins from Memorial Hospital. Your son, David Miller, has been admitted following a car accident." The world tilted beneath my feet. Despite everything, my first instinct was concern. Is he all right?" "He's stable, but has multiple injuries. He's been asking for you." My finger hovered over the end call button. It would be so easy to hang up, to continue my life without him, to leave him to face his consequences alone, just as he had left me to face mine. But I couldn't. Not because I had forgiven him, I hadn't, but because I refused to become what he had accused me of being: selfish, uncaring, putting my needs above all else. "Tell him I'll be there within the hour," I said, already calculating the fastest route to the hospital. The antiseptic smell hit me as soon as I entered the building. How many times had I walked these corridors as a nurse, comforting families, tending to patients, building a life of service? Now I was on the other side, a visitor, a mother whose relationship with her son lay in ruins, but who couldn't ignore the pull of blood. David's room was on the 3rd floor. I paused outside the door, gathering my strength, preparing myself for whatever awaited me. Would he be angry, contrite, manipulative? I had no way of knowing which version of my son I would encounter. I pushed open the door to find him asleep, his face bruised, his right leg elevated and encased in plaster, his left arm similarly immobilized. Monitors beeped steadily beside him, a reassuring rhythm that told me he was indeed stable. A chair sat empty beside the bed. I approached quietly, not wanting to wake him, and lowered myself into it. For a long moment, I simply looked at him, this man who had caused me so much pain, but who had once been the center of my universe. In sleep, with the arrogance and anger wiped from his features, he looked more like the boy I had raised, vulnerable, human. I must have made a sound, a sigh perhaps, because his eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he seemed confused. Then recognition dawned, followed by an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Shame? Relief? Fear? "Mom." His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "You came." "Of course I came," I replied, neither warm nor cold, simply stating a fact. "I didn't think you would." "Not after—" He let the sentence trail off, unable or unwilling to name what he had done. "I'm still your mother," I said, the words carrying a weight that seemed to press down on both of us. "That hasn't changed, even if everything else has." He turned his face away, but not before I saw the tears forming. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." "You're right," I agreed, my voice steady. It doesn't change anything, but I hear you. A silence fell between us, filled with all the words we couldn't say, all the trust that had been broken, all the love that had been twisted into something unrecognizable. Jessica left, he finally said, still not looking at me. The day of the meeting with the lawyers. She took what she could carry and disappeared. The divorce papers came a week later. I nodded, unsurprised. She found another target, I assume. Probably, he admitted, the single word laden with the weight of his disillusionment. I was such a fool, Mom. I believed everything she told me. About you, about herself, about our future together. Yes, you were, I agreed. Not to wound him further, but because the time for comforting lies had long passed. But you weren't her first victim, and you won't be her last. He finally turned to face me, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. How did I not see it? The manipulation, the lies. How did I let her turn me against my own mother? Because you wanted to believe her, I said softly. Because it's easier to blame someone who loves you unconditionally than to question someone whose love comes with conditions. The truth of my words hung in the air between us, neither accusation nor absolution, simply reality. I don't expect you to forgive me, David said after a long moment. I wouldn't, if I were you. Then we're in agreement, I replied. Because I don't forgive you, not yet, maybe not ever. What you did, it broke something fundamental between us, David. Something I'm not sure can be repaired. He nodded, accepting my words without protest. I understand, but I'm grateful you came today. It's more than I deserve. It is, I confirmed, rising from the chair. The nurse said you'll be released in a few days. Do you have someone to help you at home? Not really, he admitted. I've been pretty much alone since Jessica left. Most of our friends, her friends really, sided with her after the divorce news broke. I considered this information, weighing it against my own plans, my own needs. The trip to Paris was 3 weeks away. The tickets purchased, the hotel reserved, the itinerary planned down to which museums I would visit on which days. I have a spare bedroom in my new condo, I heard myself saying, the words surprising me as much as they seemed to surprise him. You can stay there until you're able to manage on your own. It's not forgiveness, I added quickly, seeing hope dawn in his eyes. It's basic humanity. I'll take it, he said quietly, and I'll earn the rest, if you'll let me try. I made no promises, offered no reassurances. The path back to trust, if it existed at all, would be long and arduous. But as I left the hospital that day, I felt something shift within me. Not the return of maternal blindness, but the first stirrings of a new kind of strength. The strength to hold both love and boundaries in the same hand, to care without compromising my own worth. The next 3 weeks were a delicate dance of preparation, readying my spare room for David's arrival while still packing for my own departure, setting clear expectations about what this temporary arrangement did and did not mean, establishing boundaries that I would not allow to be crossed again. When the day came to bring him home from the hospital, I was ready. The spare room was prepared with everything he might need during his recovery. The kitchen stocked with easy-to-prepare meals, a list of physical therapists and follow-up appointments organized in a binder. This is nice, David commented as I helped him settle into the guest room, his movements awkward with the cast on his leg and the sling on his arm. Better than my apartment. It's temporary, I reminded him, not unkindly but firmly. Just until you're back on your feet. I know, he acknowledged. And I know you're leaving for Paris next week. I'll be fine on my own. I've arranged for a home health aide to come in daily. I nodded, relieved that he wasn't expecting me to cancel my plans. Good. Carol will check in on you too. She's still not your biggest fan, but she's agreed to make sure you're not lying on the floor unable to reach the phone. A shadow crossed his face at the mention of floors, the memory of what he had done still fresh for both of us. Mom, Not now, David. I cut him off, unwilling to revisit that day, that moment. Maybe someday we'll talk about it, but not now. Right now you need to rest, and I need to finish packing. He accepted this boundary with a nod, settling back against the pillows. Thank you for everything. I left the room without responding, my emotions too complex to distill into words. Gratitude was not what I was looking for from him, nor apologies, nor promises of changed behavior. What I wanted was something he might never be able to give me. The son I thought I had, the love I thought was unconditional, the trust I had believed unbreakable. The week passed in a blur of final preparations. David was a quiet presence in the condo, confined mostly to his room or the living room sofa, dependent on me for meals and assistance, but careful not to make demands or assumptions. He watched me pack with a wistfulness that I chose not to acknowledge, focusing instead on the practical tasks at hand. The night before my departure, as I checked my passport for the 10th time and confirmed my airport shuttle reservation, David called me from the living room where he had been reading. "Mom, can you come here for a minute? There's something I want to give you." Curious and slightly wary, I joined him, finding him holding a small package wrapped in simple blue paper. "It's not much," he said, extending it toward me. "Just something I thought might be useful on your trip." I took it cautiously, as if it might contain something dangerous. The package was light, the contents shifting slightly as I turned it over in my hands. "Go ahead, open it," he encouraged, watching me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Inside the wrapping was a leather-bound journal, the cover embossed with a simple compass rose. The pages were blank, waiting to be filled. "I thought you might want to document your travels," David explained. "Take pictures, of course, but also write down your thoughts, your experiences. Create a record of this new chapter." The gift was thoughtful, appropriate, devoid of the emotional manipulation I had half expected. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. "It's perfect." "There's a note inside," he added, his voice hesitant. "You don't have to read it now, maybe on the plane or when you get to Paris, or never, if that's what you prefer." I nodded, slipping the journal into my carry-on bag without opening it to find the note. That was a conversation or monologue for another time, when I was far from here, insulated by distance and the anonymity of a foreign city. "Good night, David," I said, retreating to my bedroom for my last night at home before the adventure began. "The home health aide will be here at 8 and my shuttle arrives at 9. "Good night, Mom," he replied, his voice following me down the hallway. "Safe travels." The next morning was a flurry of last-minute checks and reminders. Passport, tickets, currency, medications, chargers, all accounted for. The home health aide, a practical woman named Marta, arrived precisely at 8, and I spent 20 minutes orienting her to the condo and to David's needs. When the shuttle driver texted his arrival, I found myself hesitating at the door, carry-on in hand, suddenly uncertain. Was I doing the right thing, leaving David while he was still recovering? Was I being selfish, pursuing my own dreams while he was vulnerable? Then I remembered the push, the fall, the humiliation, the weeks of manipulation and gaslighting, the threats to have me declared incompetent, and I knew that this trip wasn't just a vacation. It was a reclamation of myself, a declaration of independence, a statement that my life was my own to direct. "Goodbye, David," I said, standing in the doorway of his room where he sat propped up in bed. "Marta has my contact information, and so does Carol. If there's a genuine emergency, they can reach me." "I'll be fine," he assured me. "Don't worry about me. Just enjoy every moment. You've earned this, Mom." Those last words, so simple yet so validating, followed me into the shuttle, through airport security, onto the plane, and across the Atlantic. "You've earned this." Yes, I had. Every step, every sacrifice, every double shift, every tear, all had led to this moment of liberation. As the plane reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign dinged off, I reached into my carry-on and pulled out the journal David had given me. My fingers found the note tucked between its pages, a single sheet folded in half. For a long moment, I held it, undecided. Then, with a deep breath, I unfolded it and began to read. "Mom," it began, the handwriting unmistakably David's, though shakier than I remembered, perhaps due to his injuries, perhaps due to emotion. "By the time you read this, you will be on your way to Paris, the first stop on a journey you should have taken decades ago." I want you to know that I understand now what I couldn't or wouldn't see before. The enormity of your sacrifices, the depth of your love, the strength of your character. Jessica didn't create the monster I became. She merely revealed the selfishness and entitlement that were already there, buried beneath the surface. I allowed her to exploit those flaws, to magnify them, to use them as weapons against the one person who had always put my needs before her own. I cannot undo what I did. I cannot unfeel the floor beneath your body or unsee the tears on your face. Those moments will haunt me for the rest of my life, as they should. But I can try, in whatever small ways remain available to me, to be worthy of the mother I so carelessly discarded. This journal is not a plea for forgiveness. It is not an attempt to bind you to me through guilt or obligation. It is simply a vessel for the new memories you will create, the new life you will build, independent of the constraints and demands that have defined your existence for too long. Fill these pages with joy, with discovery, with the unfettered delight of a woman finally free to pursue her own dreams. And know that somewhere, the son who failed you is hoping that each day brings you a happiness you never thought possible. With love, respect, and profound regret, David. I closed the note, folded it carefully, and returned it to its place between the journal's pages. Outside the plane's window, the Atlantic stretched vast and blue beneath us, a blank canvas, much like the one I now held in my hands. The future remained unwritten, both my own and the one I might, in time, rebuild with my son. But for now, in this moment suspended between continents, between past and future, I allowed myself to feel something I had almost forgotten: hope. Not the desperate hope of a woman clinging to an illusion, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who has survived the worst and emerged stronger, wiser, more fully herself. The kind of hope that doesn't depend on others for its fulfillment, the kind that carries its own light, even in the darkest places. As the plane continued its journey eastward, I opened the journal to its first blank page and began to write. Today, at 67 years old, my life begins anew. 6 months later, I sold my house for $950,000. I bought a small condo by the sea next to Carol. And with the remaining money, I started traveling the world. Paris, Rome, Tokyo, cities. I had always dreamed of seeing, but had sacrificed for motherhood. I started a blog called My Life Begins at 67, where I share my story and help other older women facing family abuse. Thousands of women write to me telling me their own stories of manipulative sons and toxic daughters-in-law. David tried to contact me several times after his divorce from Jessica, but I never answered. Some wounds are too deep to heal, and some choices have permanent consequences. Today, as I write this from a terrace in Santorini, watching the most beautiful sunset I have ever witnessed, I can say something I never thought I would say. I am happy, truly happy, free from the toxicity, free from the manipulation, free from sacrificing my well-being for people who didn't value it. Sometimes the greatest love we can give ourselves is to walk away from those who hurt us, even if they share our blood. I learned that family isn't always found in blood ties, but in those who love, respect, and protect us. And at 67 years old, I finally learned to be selfish in the right way by putting my own well-being first. The Mediterranean breeze carries the scent of jasmine as I close my journal. 6 months have passed since I first landed in Paris, my heart burdened with decades of pain, yet strangely lightened by newfound freedom. That first morning in Montmartre, watching the sunrise from my hotel balcony, I felt something unfamiliar stirring within me: possibility. Not the constricted possibility of a life defined by others' needs, but the vast, uncharted possibility of a woman rediscovering herself. My phone buzzes with a notification. Another comment on my blog post from yesterday. When blood isn't thicker than water, setting boundaries with toxic family members. I've received over 300 responses in less than 24 hours, each one a variation of the same theme. Women who sacrificed everything for family, only to find themselves discarded when they were no longer useful. Your words saved me, writes Margaret from Minnesota. After reading your story, I finally found the courage to tell my son and his wife that no, they cannot move into my house temporarily, while I conveniently relocate to a nursing home at 62. The look of shock on their faces when I said I was keeping my home and taking that cruise to Alaska I've always dreamed about. Priceless. I smile, imagining Margaret packing her suitcase, perhaps experiencing that same rush of terrified exhilaration I felt boarding the plane to Paris. The world opens differently to women our age, not with the brash welcome it extends to youth, but with a quiet acknowledgement of our earned wisdom, our battle scars, our resilience. My blog began as therapy, a way to process the trauma of David's betrayal. I never expected it to resonate with so many women. Now, with over 50,000 subscribers and a book deal on the horizon, My Life Begins at 67 has become something of a movement. Women from all walks of life sharing their stories of reclaiming their power after decades of putting everyone else first. The waiter approaches with a fresh glass of local wine. Anything else, Mrs. Miller? No, thank you, Nikos. Just the check when you have a moment. I've been coming to the same restaurant every evening for the past week, working on the final chapter of my book while watching the sunset paint the whitewashed buildings of Oya in gold and pink. The staff now treats me like family, the good kind that respects boundaries and expects nothing in return for kindness. As I take a sip of wine, my phone rings. Carol's name flashes on the screen. My sister has become my anchor during these months of transformation, keeping me grounded while encouraging me to soar. Eleanor, you won't believe who I just ran into at the grocery store. Carol's voice bubbles with barely contained excitement. Jessica! And guess what? She was with an elderly gentleman who looked absolutely miserable. A chill runs down my spine despite the warm evening air. She's found her next target. That's what I thought too. I followed them to the parking lot, discreetly of course, and heard her call him Darling Robert. He must be at least 75, Eleanor. And he was helping her load bags into a very expensive-looking car. The name strikes me like a physical blow. Robert. The same name as my lawyer who helped expose Jessica's scheme. The coincidence seems almost too perfect, too symbolic of her pattern of exploitation. Did you say anything to her? I ask, already knowing the answer. Are you kidding? I made sure she saw me. I waited until they were about to get in the car, then walked right past them. You should have seen her face, Eleanor. She went white as a sheet. She recognized you. Oh, she remembered me all right. I smiled and said, Hello, Jessica. How lovely to see you found your next victim. Then I handed the poor man my business card and told him he might want to Google her name before signing any documents. I've never seen someone get into a car so fast in my life. I should feel vindicated, perhaps even amused at Jessica's discomfort. Instead, I feel only a profound weariness at the thought of another elderly person potentially falling prey to her manipulations. You should call Robert, our Robert, the lawyer. Give him the gentleman's name if you got it. He might be able to warn him more officially. Already done, Carol assures me. That was my first call. Robert said he'd look into it immediately. He's still quite invested in making sure Jessica doesn't hurt anyone else. After we hang up, I sit in contemplative silence, watching the last rays of sun disappear behind the horizon. Jessica's reappearance in our orbit, even peripherally, stirs emotions I thought I had processed and released. Not anger or resentment toward her. Those have faded with time and distance, but a lingering sadness for David. Despite everything, he was as much her victim as I was, even if he participated willingly in his own deception. My son has continued his attempts to contact me throughout my travels. Emails that I read but don't answer. Voicemails I listen to before deleting. A letter waiting at each new destination. Somehow always finding me despite my nomadic existence. His persistence speaks to either genuine remorse or an inability to accept that some actions have irreversible consequences. Perhaps both. His most recent email arrived this morning. Mom, I've been in therapy for 4 months now. My therapist thinks it might be healing for both of us if we could have even one conversation. I understand if you're not ready. I'll wait as long as it takes. I'm trying to become someone worthy of being your son again. I haven't decided yet whether to respond. The Eleanor who existed before that birthday party would have rushed to forgive, to smooth things over, to pretend the wound wasn't still bleeding beneath hastily applied bandages. But I am no longer that Eleanor. The woman who sits on this terrace in Santorini, watching stars emerge above the caldera, understands that true healing sometimes requires permanent separation from the source of injury. The check arrives, and I leave Nikos a generous tip. Tomorrow I fly to Athens, then on to Istanbul, another city I've dreamed of visiting since I was a girl reading my father's dog-eared copy of The Travels of Marco Polo. At each destination, I collect not souvenirs, but experiences. The taste of authentic bouillabaisse in Marseille, the echo of my footsteps in the Colosseum, the perfect mathematical precision of the Meiji Shrine in Tokyo. Back in my hotel room, I open my laptop to check the final arrangements for tomorrow's departure. An email notification appears, a message from my publisher with the proposed cover design for my book. The title, The Floor Beneath Me, Rising After Family Betrayal, appears in elegant font above a photograph I took in Paris. An elderly woman, me, though you can only see my back, standing alone but strong against the backdrop of the Eiffel Tower, silhouetted by the setting sun. It's perfect. Not because it's beautiful, though it is, but because it captures exactly what I want other women my age to understand. That falling doesn't mean staying down. That being pushed doesn't make you powerless. That sometimes the greatest adventures begin when you least expect them. I approved the design with a quick reply, and then turned to my suitcase, carefully packing the few possessions I've carried from country to country. I travel light these days, having learned that most of what we think we need is merely ballast weighing us down. As I fold my clothes, my phone pings with another notification. An email from Robert Evans, my lawyer, with a subject line that makes my heart skip. Jessica arrested. Urgent. I open it immediately, my hands trembling slightly. The message is brief but comprehensive. Jessica has been arrested for attempting to defraud her newest fiancé, Robert Chambers, a 78-year-old retired surgeon. My sister's warning prompted him to contact Robert Evans, who initiated an investigation that uncovered a sophisticated scheme already in motion. Jessica had convinced Mr. Chambers to add her to his accounts and was in the process of transferring substantial funds when the authorities intervened. The prosecutor wants to know if you'd be willing to testify about your experience, Robert writes. Your case helps establish a pattern that strengthens the current charges. No pressure, but if you're returning to the States anytime soon, your testimony could make a significant difference. I sit heavily on the edge of the bed, emotions churning. The prospect of facing Jessica again, of revisiting that painful chapter in a public forum, sends anxiety spiraling through me. Yet I think of all the women who have written to me, women who found courage in my story, women who might benefit from seeing justice served in a case so similar to their own. My return ticket to the States isn't booked until next month, when I'm scheduled to begin my book tour. But plans can be changed. Sometimes the path to healing includes confronting those who wounded us, not for revenge, but for closure, for protection of others, for the final severing of invisible bonds. I reply to Robert, I'll be there. Send me the details, and I'll rearrange my schedule. Then I send a message to my publisher explaining the situation and requesting an adjustment to my tour dates. Their response is immediate and supportive. This actually works better for publicity. Author testifies against con artist daughter-in-law will generate significant media interest ahead of your book release. Their pragmatism makes me smile despite the seriousness of the situation. The publishing world, I've discovered, has a remarkable talent for finding the marketable angle in every human drama. I sleep fitfully that night, dreaming of courtrooms where the floor keeps tilting beneath me, of Jessica's face morphing into David's and back again, of falling endlessly while voices murmur, "She deserves more than you." I wake before dawn, drenched in sweat despite the cool air from the open window. Rather than trying to return to sleep, I wrap myself in the hotel's plush robe and step onto the balcony. The sky is just beginning to lighten over the Aegean, stars fading as the first hint of dawn brushes the horizon. This in-between time has always felt sacred to me, a liminal space where past and future seem equally distant, and only the present moment exists with perfect clarity. In this clarity, I make a decision that surprises even me. I will testify against Jessica, yes. But I will also respond to David's email. Not with forgiveness, I'm not there yet, perhaps never will be, but with an opening, a crack in the door I slammed shut 6 months ago. I return to my laptop and compose a brief message. I'll be returning to the States next week to testify in Jessica's fraud case. If you're still interested in that conversation, we could meet. 1 hour, public place, no expectations on either side. Your therapist can join if that helps. I hit send before I can reconsider, then close the laptop and return to the balcony to watch the sunrise complete its magnificent transformation of night into day. Whatever comes next, I will face it standing on my own 2 feet, rooted in the woman I have become, rather than the woman I was trained to be. The journey home feels longer than the one that took me away. Perhaps because I'm traveling toward confrontation rather than escape, or perhaps simply because I've grown accustomed to moving forward rather than circling back. The familiar skyline of my coastal hometown emerges beneath the plane's wing, the ocean stretching blue and limitless beyond it. I've seen grander vistas in my travels, but this view still tugs at something essential within me. Not nostalgia exactly, but recognition. This place knows me, for better or worse. Carol meets me at the airport, enfolding me in a fierce hug that communicates everything words cannot. "You look different," she says, holding me at arm's length for inspection. "European, somehow. Sophisticated." "It's the scarf," I joke, touching the silk I purchased in a small shop in Paris. "Apparently, it's all in how you tie it." "It's not the scarf," she insists as we collect my luggage. "It's you. You stand differently, like you've grown 3 inches taller." The observation makes me smile. I do feel taller in some indefinable way, as if the physical act of standing up to David and Jessica somehow lengthened my spine, expanded my posture. 6 months of not bending to accommodate others will do that for you. Carol's beach house welcomes me with sunlight and sea breezes. She's prepared the guest room, the same one where I took refuge after fleeing my home, but everything feels different now. I'm not escaping. I'm arriving, not hiding, choosing. The distinction means everything. "David called me after you emailed him," Carol mentions casually as she helps me unpack. "He wanted to know if I thought you were really open to talking, or if you were just being polite." I pause, a folded sweater in my hands. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you don't do anything just to be polite anymore, that if you offered to meet you meant it, but that he shouldn't expect some tearful Hallmark movie reunion." She sits on the edge of the bed, her expression serious. "Are you sure about this, Eleanor? After everything you've built these past months, all the progress you've made, is reopening that door really what you want?" The question deserves careful consideration. Is it what I want or what I feel obligated to do? The old Eleanor wouldn't have known the difference. The new one recognizes the distinction immediately. "It's what I want," I answer with certainty. Not for his sake, but for mine. I've spent 6 months writing about healing, about reclaiming personal power, about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I need to see if I can practice what I preach, if only to test the strength of my own convictions. Carol nods, seemingly satisfied with my response. "Well, you have the prosecution meeting tomorrow and the preliminary hearing the day after. I told David you'd contact him once those were behind you." The mention of the legal proceedings redirects my thoughts to Jessica. Has there been any news about her case beyond what Robert told me? Only that she's pleading not guilty despite the mountain of evidence. Robert says she's hired some hotshot defense attorney who specializes in misunderstood women cases. Apparently, her strategy is to paint herself as the real victim, a woman so traumatized by her past that she seeks security in unhealthy ways. The audacity is so perfectly on brand for Jessica that I almost laugh. Of course she'd find a way to weaponize victimhood. It's her specialty. "The prosecutor isn't buying it," Carol assures me. "Especially not with your testimony and the documentation from her previous marriages. Speaking of which," she hands me a thick folder, "Robert sent this over. It's everything you'll need to review before tomorrow." I spend the afternoon and evening immersed in legal documents, refreshing my memory of details I've tried to put behind me. The recorded threats, the fraudulent claims about my mental competence, the physical assault, seeing it all laid out in sterile legal language makes it seem both more and less real somehow. More concrete in its documentation, less connected to the emotional devastation it caused. By the time I meet with the prosecutor the next morning, I feel prepared, centered, clear about my role in this process. Sandra Chen, the assistant district attorney handling Jessica's case, is a sharp-eyed woman about 15 years my junior, with a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately puts me at ease. Mrs. Miller, thank you for adjusting your travel plans to assist us, she begins once we're settled in her office. Your testimony provides crucial context for the pattern of behavior we're establishing. I'm happy to help prevent her from harming others, I reply, meaning it. Though I admit I'm nervous about seeing her in court. Sandra's expression softens slightly. That's completely understandable. Confronting someone who's hurt you is never easy, especially in a public forum. But remember, you'll be speaking from a position of power, not vulnerability. You're the one who exposed her schemes, who refused to be victimized, who rebuilt your life on your own terms. She's the one facing criminal charges. The perspective shift helps settle my nerves. Sandra is right. The woman who will take the stand is not the same one who fell to the marble floor of her living room, humiliated and broken. I am stronger now, wiser, unbound by the obligations that once made me vulnerable to manipulation. The preliminary hearing the following day proceeds exactly as Sandra predicted. Jessica sits at the defense table wearing a conservative navy dress, her previously flashy jewelry replaced by a simple cross necklace, a calculated costume choice meant to project humility and faith. She doesn't look at me when I enter, keeping her eyes downcast in an impressive performance of demure repentance. But when I take the stand and begin describing the events of that birthday party, the calculated manipulation, the public humiliation, the physical assault, her facade cracks momentarily. Our eyes meet across the courtroom, and I see a flicker of the real Jessica, calculating, cold, furious at being exposed. In that moment, any lingering doubt about my testimony evaporates. This woman would happily destroy anyone who stands between her and what she wants. I speak clearly, factually, without emotional embellishment. I don't need to dramatize what happened. The truth is damning enough. When I describe David pushing me to the floor at Jessica's instigation, several jury members visibly react, one older woman actually gasping aloud. The defense attorney tries to paint me as a possessive mother unhappy with my son's choice of wife, a wealthy woman unwilling to share with family in need, an unreliable narrator exaggerating events due to my advanced age and emotional state. But his questions only give me more opportunity to calmly present the documented evidence supporting my account. The recordings, the photographs, the witness statements collected after the fact. By the time I step down from the witness stand, even Jessica's performance of victimhood has slipped, replaced by a thinly veiled hostility she can no longer completely disguise. The judge sets a trial date and denies the defense's request for reduced bail, citing the substantial and concerning evidence of a pattern of predatory behavior targeting vulnerable elderly individuals. Outside the courthouse, I find myself surrounded by reporters, their questions overlapping in a cacophony of curiosity. Mrs. Miller, how does it feel to confront your daughter-in-law? Are you and your son estranged? Is it true you're publishing a book about your experience? Before I can decide whether to respond or simply push through to the waiting car, Sandra appears at my side. Mrs. Miller has provided her testimony and has no further comment at this time. However, she pauses strategically, ensuring the cameras are capturing the moment her forthcoming book, The Floor Beneath Me, addresses these issues in depth and will be available next month from Horizon Press. I hide my smile at her seamless promotion as she guides me through the media gauntlet to the parking lot where Carol waits. My publisher couldn't have orchestrated better publicity if they'd planned it themselves. You were magnificent, Carol declares as we pull away from the courthouse. Calm, dignified, absolutely credible. Did you see Jessica's face when the judge denied bail reduction? I thought she might actually explode. I saw, I confirm, the tension I've been carrying for days finally beginning to ease. But honestly, I feel sorry for her in a way. Sorry? For that manipulative sociopath? Carol sounds genuinely shocked. Not for what's happening to her, she's earned every consequence coming her way. But for whatever twisted her into someone who can only find value in what she can take from others. That's a poverty no amount of stolen money can fix. Carol glances at me, her expression softening. Look at you, finding compassion even after everything she did. You really have changed, Eleanor. Not changed, I correct her gently. Expanded. The capacity was always there, just buried under layers of obligation and insecurity and misplaced loyalty. We drive in comfortable silence for a while, the coastal scenery rolling past the windows in familiar patterns of blue ocean and white sand. Tomorrow I'll meet with David at a small cafe near the harbor, neutral territory for a conversation that feels simultaneously overdue and premature. The thought sends anxiety fluttering through my chest, but beneath it lies a steady current of resolve. Whatever happens, I will remain anchored in my truth, my boundaries, my hard-won self-respect. That evening, unable to sleep despite my exhaustion, I walk along the beach near Carol's house. The moon casts a silver path across the dark water, an invitation to journeys yet untaken. I've traveled more in the past 6 months than in all my previous decades combined. Yet I feel I've barely begun to explore all that awaits me in this unexpected third act of my life. My phone vibrates in my pocket. A text from David. Thank you for agreeing to meet tomorrow. It means more than I can express. I don't respond, unsure what to say that wouldn't create expectations I may not be able or willing to fulfill. Instead, I continue my moonlit walk, letting the rhythm of the waves settle my thoughts, prepare me for whatever tomorrow may bring. The cafe David chose is busy enough to provide ambient privacy, but quiet enough for actual conversation. I arrive 15 minutes early, selecting a table with a clear view of both the entrance and the exit, a habit I've developed during my travels as a woman alone in unfamiliar places. I order a cappuccino and wait, watching the door with a calm that surprises me. When David enters, I almost don't recognize him. Gone is the polished financial advisor with the designer suits and carefully styled hair. This man is thinner, his face more angular, his clothing simple jeans and a button-down shirt. He scans the room anxiously until his eyes find mine, and the naked hope in his expression nearly undoes my composure. He approaches slowly, as if afraid any sudden movement might cause me to flee. Mom, he says simply, stopping a respectful distance from the table. Thank you for coming. Sit down, David, I reply, gesturing to the chair across from mine. You look well. It's not entirely true. He looks healthier than when I last saw him in the hospital, certainly. But there's a weariness about him that's new, a gravitas that wasn't there before. He sits carefully, his movements precise, controlled. You look amazing, he counters with genuine admiration. Travel suits you. Freedom suits me. I correct him gently, being the author of my own life rather than a supporting character in someone else's. He absorbs this with a thoughtful nod. I've been reading your blog. Your writing is powerful. It's helping a lot of people. That's the hope. A silence falls between us, not exactly uncomfortable, but heavy with all that remains unsaid. The waitress arrives to take David's order, just coffee, black, providing a momentary reprieve from the intensity of our reunion. When she leaves, David folds his hands on the table, visibly gathering his courage. I don't know where to begin, Mom. I'm sorry feels insultingly inadequate for what I did to you. Then don't begin there, I suggest. Tell me about your therapy instead. You mentioned in your email that you've been going for 4 months. The redirect seems to relieve him. Yes, twice weekly. It's been illuminating, painful, but necessary. I've been diagnosed with dependent personality disorder with narcissistic features. Essentially, I'm pathologically susceptible to manipulation by people who make me feel special while simultaneously exploiting my insecurities. The clinical assessment fits what I witnessed during his relationship with Jessica, but hearing him articulate it with such self-awareness is startling. That sounds like a difficult diagnosis to receive. It was, he acknowledges. But it also explains so much. Why I was drawn to Jessica despite the red flags. Why I was willing to hurt you to please her. Why I've struggled with relationships my entire adult life. It's not an excuse for what I did, just a framework for understanding it and changing the patterns. I sip my cappuccino considering his words. And how is that work going? Changing the patterns? Slowly, he admits with a rueful smile. Very slowly. I'm learning to recognize when I'm being manipulated, to value myself enough to walk away from people who only want what I can give them, to build healthier attachments based on mutual respect rather than dependency and exploitation. Those are valuable skills at any age, I observe, thinking of my own journey these past months. They are, he agrees, but the hardest part has been facing what I did to you. Not just that day at the party, though that's the most shameful moment of my life, but all of it. Allowing Jessica to isolate you, treating your legitimate concerns as hysteria, prioritizing her approval over your well-being, betraying the one person who had always put me first. His voice breaks on the last words, and he looks down, struggling for composure. I find myself in the unexpected position of wanting to comfort him despite everything, a reflexive maternal instinct I thought had been extinguished by his betrayal. I resist the urge, reminding myself that his emotional growth requires facing the full consequences of his actions without cushioning. I read your book manuscript, he continues after regaining control. My therapist got an advance copy through a colleague at the publisher. He thought it might be therapeutic for me to see your perspective, to fully understand the impact of what I did. This information catches me off guard. I wasn't aware they were distributing advance copies yet. They're not, widely. Just a few for potential endorsements. My therapist used to be a professor with one of the editors. He meets my eyes directly. It's a powerful book, Mom. Devastating but ultimately hopeful. I barely recognize myself in your description, yet I knew it was accurate. That's how disconnected I was from my own behavior. I'm not sure how to respond to this. The manuscript is deeply personal, laying bare not just the events around Jessica's birthday party, but my entire journey as a woman who subsumated her identity to motherhood, only to find herself discarded when no longer needed. It was never meant for David's eyes, yet here he sits, having read my most intimate thoughts about him, about us, about the wreckage of our relationship. What stood out to you? I ask, genuinely curious about his reaction. The part where you described sitting on the floor after I pushed you, watching everyone leave without helping you. His voice is barely audible now. You wrote that it wasn't the physical pain that broke you, but the realization that you had become invisible, that all those years of pouring yourself into others had somehow rendered you unworthy of basic human compassion. I remember writing those words, the catharsis of finally articulating the core wound that propelled me from victim to survivor. That was a pivotal moment for me. It was the moment I truly became my father's son, David says with quiet intensity. The man who walked out on his family without a backward glance, who valued his own desires above his responsibilities, who could justify any cruelty in service to his own needs. The comparison startles me. David has rarely spoken of his father, the man who abandoned us when David was just 7 years old. You're not your father, David. I became him that day, he insists, and I've spent every day since trying to unbecome him, to find my way back to the person you raised me to be, someone capable of empathy, integrity, accountability. The waitress returns with his coffee, interrupting the flow of conversation. When she leaves, I find myself seeking a change in direction, unwilling to wade further into these emotional depths without establishing clearer boundaries. Have you heard about Jessica's arrest? I ask, though I suspect he must have. He nods, relief evident in the slight relaxation of his shoulders at the topic shift. Robert called me. I'll be testifying at her trial as well. Part of making amends is publicly acknowledging my role in what happened to you. That can't be easy. It's not, he agrees simply. But it's necessary. For my recovery and for her prosecution. The more victims who come forward, the less likely she is to hurt anyone else. We talk then about the details of the case, the evidence being compiled, the prosecution's strategy, safer territory than the raw wound of our personal relationship. As we speak, I notice subtle changes in David beyond the physical ones. He listens more intently, interrupts less, considers his words carefully before speaking. The arrogance that had become so prominent during his time with Jessica has been replaced by a humility that seems genuine rather than performative. When our cups are empty and the natural end of our meeting approaches, David reaches into his messenger bag and pulls out a small wrapped package. "I brought you something. Not a bribe or an attempt to buy forgiveness," he adds quickly. "Just something I thought you might appreciate." Curious despite my wariness, I accept the package and unwrap it carefully. Inside is a framed photograph I haven't seen in decades. David, at about 5 years old, sitting on my lap as I read him a story, both of us completely absorbed in the book, unaware the picture was being taken. I remember Carol snapping it during a visit, capturing a moment of perfect connection between mother and son. "I found it when I was cleaning out my apartment after Jessica left," David explains. "I thought you might want it for your new place, whenever you decide to settle down again." The gesture touches me in ways I hadn't expected, not because it suggests some magical healing of our relationship, but because it acknowledges what was real and valuable between us before everything shattered. "Thank you," I say simply. "I'll find a place for it." As we prepare to leave, David hesitates, clearly wanting to ask something but unsure if he should. Finally, he gathers his courage. "Would it be all right if I wrote to you sometimes? Not expecting responses necessarily, just to share my progress, to keep you updated if you're interested." I consider the request carefully, weighing my boundaries against the tentative reconnection we've established today. "You can email me," I decide. "I may not always respond, and I may never be ready for more than this kind of limited contact. I need you to understand and respect that possibility." "I do," he assures me, his relief palpable. "Whatever you're comfortable with, whenever you're comfortable with it. I'm just grateful for today." We part with an awkward moment where he clearly wants to hug me but restrains himself, settling for a slight nod before walking away. I watch him go, this man who is my son but also a stranger. This person who broke my heart but is sincerely trying to mend his own broken places. The emotions swirling through me defy simple categorization. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but perhaps the first fragile tendril of something that might eventually grow into a new kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Back at Carol's house, I find her waiting anxiously on the deck, clearly having been watching for my return. "How was it?" she asks, as I sink into the chair beside her. "Complicated," I reply honestly. "He's changed, or trying to change. Time will tell if it's sustainable." "And how do you feel about that?" I consider the question, watching seagulls wheel above the shoreline. Cautiously optimistic for him, protective of myself, unwilling to rush back into a relationship that could wound me again. She nods approvingly. "That sounds healthy on all fronts." "It feels healthy," I agree. 6 months ago, I would have either shut him out completely or rushed to forgive everything. Now I can hold both possibilities, that he might genuinely be transforming, and that I might still need permanent distance from him, without feeling I have to immediately choose one path. "That's wisdom, sister," Carol says, squeezing my hand. Hard-earned wisdom. The following weeks pass in a blur of legal proceedings, book launch preparations, and readjustment to American life after months abroad. Jessica's case moves toward trial, with Robert keeping me updated on each development. David emails occasionally as promised, brief messages about his therapy insights, his volunteer work at a senior center, an irony not lost on either of us, his slow rebuilding of a life without Jessica's toxic influence. I read each one, sometimes responding with brief acknowledgments, sometimes simply absorbing the information without comment. The day before my book launch, a certified letter arrives from the district attorney's office. Jessica has accepted a plea deal, 3 years in state prison followed by 5 years of probation, plus restitution to her victims. She'll plead guilty to multiple counts of fraud and elder abuse, sparing us all the ordeal of a public trial. The news brings a complex mix of emotions: relief that it's over, satisfaction that she's facing consequences, and a strange sense of anticlimax. Part of me had been preparing for the confrontation of a trial, the chance to look her in the eye as justice was served. Yet perhaps this quieter resolution is more fitting, allowing all of us to move forward without further trauma. I share the news with David via email, and his response comes quickly. Justice served, if inadequately. I hope this brings you some peace, Mom. You deserved better from both of us. The book launch exceeds even my publisher's optimistic expectations. The Floor Beneath Me debuts at number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list, propelled by media interest in Jessica's case and the growing community of women who found inspiration in my blog. I find myself on talk shows and podcasts, discussing not just my personal story, but the larger issues it represents: elder abuse, financial exploitation, the cultural devaluation of aging women, the reclamation of self after trauma. At each event, women approach me with tears in their eyes and stories of their own: daughters who depleted their savings, sons who abandoned them in nursing homes, in-laws who turned children against them. Some have already found their way to freedom, inspired by my blog. Others are just beginning to recognize the manipulation patterns in their own lives. I listen to each one, offering what wisdom I can, directing them to resources, reminding them that age doesn't diminish their right to dignity and respect. 6 months after returning to the States, as I prepare for another book tour, this one international, following the foreign rights sales that have exceeded everyone's expectations, I receive an email from David that differs from his usual brief updates. "I've been offered a job in Seattle," he writes, "a fresh start in a new city, away from the memories and the people who knew me at my worst. My therapist thinks it's a positive step forward. Before I accept, I wanted to ask if you have any objections. The last thing I want is for you to feel I'm running away from accountability or abandoning our fragile reconnection. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it." The fact that he's asking my opinion, rather than simply informing me of his decision, registers as significant progress. The old David would have prioritized his needs without consideration for mine. This new version recognizes the impact his choices have on others. I reply after careful consideration: "Seattle is a beautiful city with opportunities for fresh starts. I think it's a positive step for your recovery. Our connection isn't dependent on geographic proximity. It exists in the continued work you do on yourself and the boundaries I maintain for myself. Go with my blessing, but go for the right reasons." His response comes within minutes. "Thank you for understanding and for challenging me to examine my motives. I'm going for the right reasons, not escape, but growth. And I'll continue the work, wherever I am." As I pack for my European book tour, I find myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the humiliation of being pushed to the floor to the triumph of international bestseller status. From the devastation of familial betrayal to the discovery of a global community of women with similar stories. From the confined existence of a mother whose identity was subsumed by her role to the expansive life of a woman defining herself on her own terms. I placed David's childhood photograph carefully among my belongings, not displayed prominently, but not hidden away either, an acknowledgement of what was and what might someday be, held in balance with what is. Perhaps that balance is the truest form of wisdom, honoring the past without being imprisoned by it, remaining open to the future without abandoning the protective boundaries of the present. On my last night before departure, I walk alone on the beach near Carol's house, watching the same moon that has witnessed every phase of my transformation. Its light creates a silver pathway across the dark water, leading toward horizons I've yet to explore. At 68 years old, with more behind me than ahead, I find myself more eager for tomorrow than I've ever been. Sometimes the greatest gift we receive from those who hurt us is the opportunity to discover our own resilience. In the breaking, we find the chance to reassemble ourselves not as others would design us, but as we truly are, stronger at the mended places, more beautiful for having been broken, more authentic for having been tested. I turn back toward the warmth of my sister's house, carrying this truth like a lantern to illuminate whatever path comes next. The woman who walks this beach is not the same one who fell to that marble floor a year ago. She stands taller, sees clearer, loves herself more fiercely. She has learned that the floor beneath her is not marble or wood or stone, but the solid foundation of her own worth, unshakable, enduring, finally recognized. And that, more than any house or relationship or achievement, is the legacy I will carry forward into whatever adventures await. That is the story worth telling. That is the life worth living, mine at last, to shape as I choose.